Welcome to the annual conference of the Catholic Social Workers National Association, which was held on July 26 through July 28, 2013, at Marytown Shrine of Maximilian Kolbe in Libertyville, Illinois. Father John Waiss, an Opus Dei priest, Associate Pastor of St. Mary's of the Angels Catholic Church in Chicago, will be speaking on the Catholic perspective of homosexuality for today's Catholic social work practice.
I've lived all over the country. You join Opus Dei, you see the world. I did most of my seminary studies in Rome, but I joined Opus Dei, met Opus Dei in South Bend, Indiana, Notre Dame. And then I came to Chicago for a couple of years, worked as an engineer, mechanical engineer, and then went out to California, to the Bay Area, San Francisco. So I've been all over. And then LA, I was in LA for 8 years after I was ordained, 10 years in San Francisco, a couple years in San Antonio. Who's from Texas here? Originally, yeah. And then I moved to New Rochelle, New York, right outside of New York. So now I'm back in Chicago. So I've done the circuit around the country, although I didn't really get back in the South, although I lived half my life in the South, in Huntsville, Alabama. Anybody from Alabama here? Mississippi? No? Which was a wonderful experience. My second 5 years of my life. So, and it was during the space program. My dad moved down there with Boeing, work on the first stage of the Saturn V, and it was an interesting experience because we were one of the families from the north that integrated an all-black church and school, St. Joseph's down there in Huntsville, and so it was a mission church that suddenly had to take care of white families as well as the black families from the South. So it was really a wonderful experience. Of course, as kids, you didn't even notice it. I mean, we didn't even know we were integrating a school. We were one of the first white families in this church and in this school. So, you just interact with kids like you always did, and it doesn't make any difference. Of course, it helps to have parents that were also very broad-minded. Today's topic, it's got a very long title. I don't like long titles, but it's Catholic Perspectives on Homosexuality for Today's Catholic Social Work Practices. I think I'm going to shorten that throughout this talk and just narrow it down. The whole thing of same-sex attraction, homosexuality, or, gay and lesbian, dealing with gay and lesbian individuals, they identify themselves as such. Some see as a great stumbling block for us. I mean, we're losing people over this issue many times. People are considering it. But I think you can also look at it as a wonderful challenge. And more than a challenge, an opportunity to witness to Jesus Christ and how our faith makes a difference in our social work and in our dealings with people in general. That this is really an opportunity, because when we're dealing with people that have same-sex attraction or are same-sex attracted, what we're dealing with is individuals with stories and background, and I think we need to see them as such and not as a problem. And that's so much how our government likes to look at it, and our society looks to look at it. The problem of poverty, or the problem of drugs, or the problem of homelessness. And what we're really dealing with is people. Individuals who are made in the image and likeness of God and have this inherent dignity. And if we don't see them as individuals, as persons, then we will marginalize them both mentally as well as physically, actually. So this is a wonderful opportunity to do just that, because we have to love those who are same-sex attracted, those who call themselves gay and lesbian, In fact, they need our love more than most. They long for it and they need it. And we need to love them just as they are. But just like with any other social need, we have to not necessarily give them what they want, but focus on giving them what they need. I think Pope Francis is a wonderful gift to us because he gives us a tremendous witness. When people say, what do you think of Pope Francis? I says, my first impression is Pope Francis is kind of a combination of John Paul II and Mother Teresa. Just that he's got that same kind of dispositions towards the poor that Mother Teresa had, and the same kind of throwing out, the pomp and everything that we see of John Paul II, and we're very much getting into the crowd and doing things unexpected that we saw in John Paul II. And, both are very wonderful gifts to the church at the end of the 20th century, and Pope Francis has integrated them into one person. That's the way I like to look at them. And I think it's a wonderful gift for the church, and is going to help us really evangelize by our example, by our actions, the culture of today. So when we're talking about Catholic perspectives, that's what I want to put the emphasis on, is the whole word Catholic. Because Catholic means what?
Universal.
Well, we know that. It's universal. This is how I abbreviate universal. Infinity with an L. Okay? You come up with shortcuts when you take notes. So that's my note-taking shortcut. Universal. But what do we mean by universal?
For all people.
We're reaching out to all people. So we have this idea of all attached to it. And this means not just those that agree with us, but we're reaching out to everybody. Those who have different religious beliefs than we do. Those that have different moral values than we do. We need to reach out to them too. So it's all. But it's also, it means everywhere. At all times. So when we talk about it, it's something that we are, that it's not just limited to the 21st century, to our present culture, to our present country, that it is truly all. And so we that's what we are reaching out to the world, all places, all times, all peoples. But it also is Catholic, and we talk about, I like to say, in mind and in heart. Okay? Normally when we talk about universal in mind, we mean doctrinally. That it means, Catholic means we teach everything that Jesus Christ taught. And not just in limited sense. And so all the teachings that were taught at all times, everywhere, to all people. What the apostles were sent to the whole world. They were Catholic from the very beginning. And they were trying to teach all those doctrines. So when we talk about Catholic, we also mean Catholic mind means embracing all the teachings. And for us, we're going to focus on the teaching on love and sexuality. And basically, the Catholic Church's teaching on this is pretty simple and straightforward. That sex outside of marriage between a man and a woman is illicit. That the only proper place is in marriage. And even within that, it has a fair amount of limitations too. That there are chaste relationships in marriage, and there's unchaste acts in marriage. So, to be Catholic, you have to embrace all those teachings. Doesn't mean you understand them all. And I think there's a lot of us who don't understand some of the teachings. But because we're Catholic, we embrace, this is what Christ taught and has been transmitted to us by the Church. We embrace it. We don't have to always understand. Hopefully, we try to understand, and we do try to make that understanding, part of, or wrestling with difficult issues. We try to, bridge that gap between our not understanding and what the Church is teaching, so that little by little we do find that we accept and understand. But we're also Catholic in heart. That means that we are concerned about everyone. We see Jesus Christ in every single human being. Not just in the ones that we feel comfortable with, or those that agree with us. To truly be Catholic means to see Jesus Christ in everyone. And that means we have to love them as we would love Jesus Christ. That's what Catholic means as well, Catholic in heart. So, for us, as putting the Catholic perspectives on homosexuality, I think it's really just helping us to see what does it really mean to be Catholic, and how do we live this out. Now, what we want to do is focus on seeing Jesus Christ in other people, and especially in those with same-sex attraction. They may be actively living the gay lifestyle, they may not be. In fact, I would say more people are trying to live chaste, celibate lives that have same-sex attraction than those that are actively gay or lesbian. But they're the ones that feel most unsupported, because you've got the great community that will gladly embrace them and accept them if they join them in their lifestyle. And then you got everybody else who just don't understand them and maybe even feel a little bit threatened by them because of, and so they don't feel understood. They can't feel like they can open up with anybody, and oftentimes they feel isolated. They don't feel understood because they can't open up and let themselves be known, and because of that, they feel isolated, even though they're around a lot of people. And those are people we have to support as well. Our focus then should be on being Catholic, and I don't know if this will stay up. Probably won't. Actually, give me my book. It'll come in handy. It's not necessary, but it's my spare time reading. But let's see if that will stay. There we go. So, when we talk about loving the person, and I think you probably know this better than I do, so I don't know why I'm preaching. I think I'm preaching to the choir here. Because it's really the same attitudes that you're having towards, whether it's the homeless person, whether it's the person that's struggling to make ends meet and you have special needs, the child that's got family problems. I mean, you love them just as they are, and that's very important. But love does not mean giving them what they want. That's my not sign, okay? It means not giving them what they want, but what they need. or giving Christ what they need, that's the real, it's a key distinction. And I think you all know that. I mean, if someone has a problem with drugs, and they want drugs, you don't give them drugs, do you? No. That's maybe what they want, but that's not what they need. And that's very important. I use an example with, some people say, well, why don't you just, allow gay and lesbian people to get married and adopt children and do all that, because that's what they want, and we give them what they want and they'll leave us alone. It's a little bit their attitude. I mean, I use this example in a weekly note that we have in the bulletin just after the Supreme Court Justice decision. I said, what if the mayors of Chicago said, we have too many homeless on the street, they're driving away tourists, and it's costing Chicago a lot of tourist dollars, and therefore what we're going to do is we're going to buy a farm in the country, put up some buildings where they can stay, and we'll bus them all there, and we'll promise to give them free drugs and free alcohol. And we'll feed them too. Would you go for that? I hope not. It's giving them what they want. And it's achieving our objectives of, getting rid of the homeless off the streets of Chicago so that tourists will feel much more comfortable and will want to come back. It's achieving the goals, but it's not treating them like human beings. This is not the human dignity that they deserve. And I would say the same thing is when people are advocating for same-sex marriage. It's giving them what they want. They want this kind of approval that a marriage, a couple have in a marriage. In fact, they even want the kind of love that they see in a happily married couple of a husband and wife, and they want that, and they desire that. But that's not what they need. That's not going to make them happy. And that's something, if we're not careful, we will succumb to just, giving them what they want. And that's really kind of a consumerist kind of mentality that we have. We even see this among Catholics in the pews, right? I'll believe this, but I don't believe that. The cafeteria Catholic. It's a consumerist mentality. Give people what they want, and they will, reward you with their money, their contributions, or whatever. But that's not what Catholic Church is. We have a consumerist attitude towards sex, towards sexuality. Homosexual sex is just a different flavor of compared to heterosexual sex or whatever. We get in this consumerist business that we view sexuality as a consumer product, and sometimes we do that with social services too. We see that as we're providing a service, and then there are customers, and instead of saying, no, we're dealing with human beings, and we're called to love them and not treat them as objects. We treat them as human beings. So this consumerist mentality can infiltrate everything we do, and it has infiltrated this whole area where we deal with sexuality. We need to treat people like Jesus Christ and give them what they need. What does a homosexual person or the same-sex attracted person really need? They need love. They need disinterested love. Particularly, they need love from a same-sex person that's not going to be threatened, that's not going to be turned into a sexual relationship. So, gay men need good, healthy relationships with men. Lesbian women need good, healthy relationships with women that are not going to get into emotional attachments or physical attachments. That's what they need. That's what they really long for. Many of those who are experiencing same-sex attraction say it's not about the sex, even though they have got involved in the gay lifestyle. They say it's really not about the sex, but they're trying to fill a hole in their heart that might have got it started very early on in their lives. Especially gay men feel like it started when they could first remember. Doesn't mean it started when they were born, but it started from those earliest memories they had. They always knew they were different, and they were, they weren't like other boys. But when do we first start remembering things? What age? 3, 4, 6. It varies. We remember things. But there are things that can happen to us before we're 3 or 4 years old that can have a severe impact on us. Think of sexual abuse of children, which can happen at a very early age. Or other physical abuse that they may not remember, or the memories may be very faint, and that can affect a person. So I think we have to be aware of that and just see, what do they need, not what do they want. Very important element to how we interact with them. Now, when we're talking about sexuality, I think it's important for us to understand what the church teaches. Very basic, but that's fundamental. The teaching on sexuality is based on, or is reaffirmed by, the teaching on the Trinity. It's the love that we see in the Trinity that then can get expressed in human love, and especially in the love between a man and woman in marriage. So let's just do a brief summary overview of our Catholic theology. So, where do we begin? We always begin with the Father, right? TF, the Father. And what is the act that we see that the Father makes in the Trinity?
Creation.
Well, creation is a manifestation of it. The creation is a temporal manifestation of it. Generation. It's an action that the Father engenders the Son. And there's a response on the Son's part. He embraces, accepts, welcomes, receives that act of the gift of the Father to the Son. And in doing so, this takes place, of course, from all eternity. It's not a temporal act like we normally consider generation or engendering. So it's an ongoing, continuous act of the Father engendering the Son. And what makes the Son God?
Returns the love to the Father.
Well, first of all, is that the Father gives everything to the Son. There's a sense of totality to it. Okay? If the Father held back anything, then the Son would not be God. But because he gives everything, the Son. But also, the Son receives everything. He has to be completely open. If he puts up any barriers, then the Son would not be God. So, we have, it's unconditional. The Son receives everything unconditionally. No barriers. But the Son, what does he do? It doesn't stop there, does it? The Son also, once he's welcomed and received this total gift of self of the Father, he images the Father. So in imaging the Father, he gives himself back to the Father. And he gives everything. It's a total gift of self. The Father receives it unconditionally. We see this manifested most perfectly in what? What was Jesus Christ's act that manifested his total gift of himself to the Father?
Crucifixion.
The cross, the crucifixion, exactly. The cross is first of all a gift of the Son to the Father. It's also done to us as well. It's a gift to us. It's a manifestation of that. But that mutual gift of self gives rise to the Holy Spirit, who personifies the love between the Father and the Son. He's considered the bond between the Father and the Son. He is the fruit of that mutual self-giving. He's the fruit of love. Or we consider it, he's love itself, personified. Now you all know this because you've all studied theology, read the catechism and everything. But what does this tell us about human sexuality? Well, I think what does it tell us about the person is that we're made in the image and likeness of God. Male and female. As male and female, we're made in the image and likeness of God. Each one of us is an incarnation of this. So we are meant to reflect this personification or incarnation of the Trinity in each one of us. And that's what gives us human dignity, our great value. So when it comes down to sexuality, we just say, if the person is an incarnation of intertrinitarian love, we need to say that we need to be the fruit of total, unconditional, mutual, free. I'm going to put down here complementary, and we're going to explain all this so that we can see why. And I think I have one other thing. Well, it's a gift of self, okay? Mutual gift of self. Now, this doesn't mean that every time this happens in the conception of a human being. But when we notice that when something is missing, this free, mutual gift of self, can you give me an example when a person is conceived from a union that's not free? Rape? Exactly. Prostitution. See, whenever you take, and we just see if a child is conceived of an act of rape or prostitution or incest or what have you, the child almost feels like something's missing in him. Their identity is somehow ruptured. They're meant to be an incarnation of this, and they feel like they're not, because that freedom was taken out of that act of engendering. them as our incarnation of the Trinity. Do they still have that dignity? Yes, because even in that act that's not free, it's intended to be free, and God uses that to bring that human being into this world. They're still loved by God. But oftentimes psychologically, it affects them. What if it's not a mutual gift of self? Any examples of that? Where it's not mutual? Yes.
Maybe an unchaste relationship.
Okay. How about IVF, in vitro fertilization? Especially when the gametes are not from the parents and maybe an anonymous donor or something like that. There's not a mutual gift of self going on here. It's manipulation. So, and a child that's a fruit of that can have identity issues there. They want to know who their father is. And now they're having, quote, rights to discover who the donor sperm or donor eggs are, so that a child can understand that. But there's something missing here. There's the mutual gift of self. Unconditional. What if unconditional is missing? Or total?
A surrogate parent, maybe? A surrogate mother?
How about just contraception? I use an example for contraception that, some people, I like using graphic examples whenever I can, because I think it helps people understand the teaching. I said, what if we saw a couple cuddling up together on a park bench, getting romantic, and the guy goes over to give his girlfriend a kiss. And she says, wait a minute, honey. I don't want to get your germs. Takes out her purse, pulls out a piece of saran wrap, puts a saran wrap over her lips and says, okay, now you can kiss me. How would the guy react? No way. Why? It changes the nature of the act. With something much more intimate, much more personal, that can give rise to human life, that's something that of great dignity, and we have no problem putting a barrier. What's that barrier saying? I don't give myself totally to you. There's a lack of the union that takes place. Or in just contraception, any form of contraception, I give myself totally to you, except my fertility. Then it's no longer total. Or I give myself unconditionally to you and embrace you unconditionally, with one condition: we don't have a child. And we put one condition on unconditional love, what happens? It's no longer unconditional love. So these things start adding up and impacting us. Now, what is the complementarity aspect so important? When I love someone that's not like me, right? A man loves a woman, and a woman loves a man. I mean, how many of you men ever get kind of miffed because of the women's way of thinking and acting? I'm surprised nobody here. How many of you women get miffed because of interacting with men who are so square? And see, the women are willing to admit it, And so, for a man to love a woman, as distinct from herself, she is not loving herself, but loving the other as other. And a man loves a woman as an other, as distinct from himself. And therefore, and the father even loves the son as distinct from himself, because he's giving totally, and he's totally receiving. And as distinct from himself. If it was as same as himself, this would all collapse. It would all collapse. And so this complementarity helps us to really love with an altruism, that I'm not seeking myself, I'm not just seeking a partner that just thinks the way I do, but I'm really learning to give myself to this other person as other, according to their needs, not according to mine. I'm constantly telling couples that you've got to love your spouse and be the kind of spouse, husband, that your wife needs, or a wife that your husband needs. Again, not according to what they want, always, but according to their needs. And that's very hard for a lot of us because we're always thinking about ourselves, what we need, what we want. And it's very important. Now you say, what does this have to do with same-sex attraction? Because it's the same thing. One of the most important things when we deal with those who are same-sex attracted or consider themselves gay or lesbian or whatever, we have to see the church's teaching on homosexuality is just part of this bigger vision of sexuality. By the way, I don't know if you ever noticed that in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, how many points deal with homosexuality? I think it's 3 points. How many deal with the 6th and 9th commandments? It's about 150 points, maybe 200. He said, this is just a small portion of this bigger teaching. But you guys single us out as something, well, we mentioned that, but we mentioned a lot of other things too. Divorce is brought up much more than same-sex attraction or homosexuality. Masturbation is dealt with. I mean, the whole gamut, because each one of them affects this global vision of what love is all about, and how sexuality is meant to be expression of that, and how in each human being has a right to be conceived with this kind of love. Now, we're not in an ideal world, we're not a perfect world, but that is what we should strive for and protect. And it's not easy. How do you deal with a same person with a same-sex attraction who comes for some of the social services that you offer? I would say the same way you would deal with an alcoholic, or with a pedophile, or with someone else. You deal with them, you love them as a person, but you also don't put them in a situation where they're going to abuse either themselves or other people. They may choose not to deal with that. And they may go away with a huff and a puff. But we have to realize our Lord dealt with the same. He came to save all. The scribes and the Pharisees, for the most part, rejected him. He came to save them, but they didn't want it. They didn't think they needed it. And so we have to say, if we're dealing with someone who has same-sex attraction and they want us to validate their lifestyle and support their lifestyle, while we can't give them any social service that would do so, that would be detrimental to their overall needs. We need to love them. We're not going to judge them. We're not here to judge. There's only one person that's going to judge, and that's God. And I think we have to have a great deal of compassion that each person has come from a very complex background. Even the pedophile who has done some horrible things, probably he experienced some pretty horrible things too when he was growing up. And oftentimes they hate themselves because they see themselves doing what had been done to them, and they despise that, but they can't control that, and it's a real horrible situation that they find themselves in. We got to love them. We got to keep them from harming themselves further. and harming other people in the process. You can do the research on the same-sex attraction and homosexuality, and you realize it's not a pretty picture. You look at mental illness, the drug abuse, the alcohol abuse, the amount they smoke cigarettes. Some people think that's the worst thing in the world, but it's well documented how the suicide rate, even in countries like Denmark and Holland and where it's been accepted for quite some time and embraced by the culture and allowed same-sex marriage, they have similar higher suicide rates than everybody. If they're committing suicide, how is it that it's making them happy? So if we know it, and the life expectancy of someone who's actively gay or lesbian their life expectancy is way down. It's in the 50s. And it's not healthy for them. Now, they're going to debate this all day long with you, saying you're just using, homophobic research. Their own researchers are noticing this. But they're not paying attention because it's not part of the agenda. It doesn't support what they want. It's not for us to argue these things, because oftentimes arguments don't go very far. We got to show them that we really care. And by the way, when you give them what they want, they don't respect you at all. I've argued, I've had some fellows that are actively gay who've argued with me, but they respect me because they see that I'm not just, dumping them, that I really care. That my response to them is because I care about you, even though it's not giving them what they want. They don't come around and agree with me, and at least not yet, but they respect you if you have any value. So, when they see their parents just going along with their marriage, they don't respect their parents. They're happy. They were able to manipulate their parents to come along to their side. They've been able to manipulate so many other people and so many, priests and ministers and whatever, and they have no respect for them. So we got to love them. We got to treat them with a lot of affection. We got to treat them with respect. We got to honor them because we see the dignity that they were created in by God. Maybe they had a sense that this was missing, one of these elements was missing in their own lives, and they go searching for it in a same-sex lifestyle. I could go on but I think I want to leave some time for questions and answers. But same-sex identity, or gay identity, lesbian identity, what's our personal identity should be based on? Yeah, but it's based on relationship. Women get this usually better than men. When a woman introduces herself, how does she normally introduce herself? I'm Jack's wife. I'm Susie's mom. The way people know who this person is by her relationship. She usually changes her identity, her name, when she gets married. Changes her identity from her relationship to her father, now to her relationship to her husband. Women get this better. Men, we tend to identify ourselves by our job, by our function, by our accomplishments, by our performance. Same-sex identity or gay identity is based on sexual attraction and sexual performance. And that's empty. There's no relationship. And what they really are looking for is a good, healthy relationship. But it's all based on performance. And for us as both you as social workers and me as a priest, what we do to help people with same-sex attraction is helping them to develop good, healthy relationships, human as well as towards God. So they should have a sense that God is my Father, and to develop a good, healthy relationship with God as Father. It's not always easy when they didn't have a good relationship with their own father. Jesus Christ is a friend, as a brother, as a lover. The Holy Spirit is this new life that comes to dwell in me through the mutual gift of myself to Jesus Christ. Especially that He comes to dwell in us, yes, through baptism, confirmation, but every time we receive the Eucharist. Bonding us to Christ, the Holy Spirit bonds us to Christ spiritually. That gives us an identity. Our relationship with Mary, our relationship with St. Joseph and the other saints, but also human relationships. And sometimes psychology can help someone with same-sex attraction, not by getting them to change their behavior, but helping them to overcome barriers to relationships. What are some barriers to relationships, good, healthy relationships, that sometimes people have a hard time with? They have a hard time trusting. They fear. As soon as the relationship starts getting serious, boom, they cut it off. Because they fear that intimacy, vulnerability that takes place in a good, healthy relationship. They fear that. So they lack trust. A psychologist can help deal with some of the emotional side of that and help them to trust. What else?
Commitment.
Well, that goes along with that commitment, their fear of the commitment.
Humility.
Okay. How about anger? You ever see people with anger? It's kind of hard to have a good relationship with someone that they're angry at you all the time. And many times, these are things that they have, deep-seated anger, resentments, that have to be dealt with, and psychologists and psychiatrists can help. They can have an obsession about sexuality too. You know, we see this in porn addictions and others addictions. There's an obsessive compulsive component to it that can be. They can be antisocial. They have this unhealthy, selfish isolation that keeps them from interacting with other people. They fear or just elude interacting with other people. Good psychologists can help with that too, helping them to feel more comfortable and putting them in a situation where they can develop healthy relationships. There's others too, but just give you some ideas that those emotions can create barriers to good, healthy relationships. Those healthy relationships form our identity as a child of God, as well as a child of our parents and our brothers, and being brothers and sisters of our brothers and sisters, siblings, you know, and our relationship to grandparents, extended family, to friends, to co-workers. Those relationships help us form a sense of our identity, who I am. That's the relationship of the Father's identity as Father is in relationship to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, which is different than the Son's relationship to the Father and to the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit's relationship to the Father and to the Son. They have distinct identities based on relationships. The same thing is reflected here in our own identity and helps us to. And the best way we can help someone with a broken identity, and it doesn't affect just people with same-sex attraction. You see people who are, has to be the most beautiful person in the center of attention, the beauty model kind of personality. They have an identity based on performance too. And there are so many other, situations that people have this broken identity and they try to fill it in other ways. And what we do is help people love them as a person and then look for ways to help them develop those healthy relationships that's going to create a healthy identity and not give them what they want, which is so self-destructive. Anyway, let's open it up for some questions. So I've gone over 45 minutes, I was trying to keep it to half an hour. So Yes, forget your name.
Gracie.
Gracie.
How do you respond when someone with same-sex attraction says, you're obviously trying to love them, but they say you're really not loving me because this is who I am? So how
And
do
you
respond to
use the same arguments back. But this is the way I am. And I'm loving you as a Catholic. I'm not going to deny my relationship with Jesus Christ, with God the Father, with the church, with Mary. Just in my loving, I'm going to love you with that as who I am. So one of the best things you can do is use the same arguments they use, but flip it around. Because that way they realize it's not all about them. See, and they want it so that it's all about them. And you're not giving them, you're violating their rights. Well, what about violating your rights? And we have rights too. And we need to be respected too, with our beliefs. Do you expect me to change my beliefs just to match your wants and desires? Well, you're forcing me to change, they say. Well, you're forcing me to change. So no, we got to respect each other as we are. And you got to respect me as a Catholic. And it's really disconcerting for them because they're so used to having the arguments focus on them. And we turn the tables on them, and then we can start a conversation. Of course, they'll oftentimes come back with another defensive attack. But you just flip it around, and he says, look, if we want to have a conversation, we got to respect each other. Yes? Okay. Your name
This
is?
is Ramona.
Ramona.
This is very similar to
Mhm.
hers. It's different shade.
Right.
Looking at it a little bit more from a legal perspective, and the ruling in Virginia v. Loving, which struck down miscegenation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond to the argument that in Virginia v. Loving it was established that marriage was a fundamental human right, and that race is no different than sexual orientation, specifically homosexuality and all the other categories, because it's an immutable characteristic, like race is an immutable characteristic. Therefore, there is the legal argument. I'm trying to stay out of the moral argument.
Right.
But the legal argument that says
Was this the Supreme Court decision recently?
Virginia v. Loving was the Supreme Court case from 53 that struck down.
Oh, the same racial. The racial. Right. That's right.
Right. And so the argument.
The argument is that race is immutable, so same-sex attraction is immutable, and it's a fundamental right.
Right.
We have no problems with whether it's immutable or not. The evidence is very slim that is genetic. The best study was done in Australia on a twin registry study there of it was something like 500 different, 500 different twins. And they found that about 10% of the twins that had same-sex attraction, their other twin had this also same-sex attraction. And that was whether they were genetic twins or fraternal twins. There was a one or two more, but within the margin of error, it's almost identical. So you say, well, if it was genetic, it should be 100%. If it was truly genetic. Which was a study that was done in the 50s that was totally debunked afterwards. The way they selected candidates of twins was from the gay community. But this is a much more objective one, and I think there is a kind of genetic component, but it's not towards homosexuality. It's more rather towards emotional sensitivity. And you see, artists tend to be more emotional sensitive. That's why they can express themselves, whether visual arts or whether audio or what have you. And that's why we see a lot of men and women in the arts involved in the gay lifestyle. They're more emotionally sensitive, but that means they're also easier to be wounded emotionally. And so we can see that there's a genetic component, but it's not towards homosexuality itself, same-sex attraction. But the church says even if it were genetic, that doesn't mean they have a right to marriage. They have a right to sexual activity. I mean, if someone says, I'm attracted to young men, or young women, do I have a right to have sex with? No. It could be, but it's genetic. I should be able to have a right to marry, a young boy. When he gets to be a certain age, I can divorce him and marry another young boy. No. We don't. So just because of sexual attraction, we can't say there's any rights associated with it. It's very different than race. You can't hide your race. I mean, you can do some things to lighten your skin and other things, but you still can't hide your race. But most people, when it comes to their same-sex attraction, goes years, even their whole life, without anybody knowing what was going on inside of them. And is that good? Maybe not. But at least it's not the same thing as. And I think we have to realize we're dealing with individuals. We got to love them as they are, and then we have to help them achieve, protect their rights, which are legitimate. They do have a right to work. We got to protect that. They cannot be marginalized because of that. One more question here.
You had mentioned earlier in the presentation, you feel there's more people seeking the chaste lifestyle who have same-sex attraction than
Yes.
not. I was just curious, is that from your experience?
It's from my own experience.
Okay.
I haven't done any huge study on that, and I haven't seen any study on that, but it's just from my own experience. There are a lot of people out there that are trying to remain chaste.
And particularly Catholics, I guess.
Catholics and Protestants,
Okay.
but even people with no religion. I've come to know that they're struggling, and I think we need to support them. And they're the ones that don't get any support. All right?
Thank you.
For more information about this annual conference, please contact Catholic Social Workers National Association at www.cswna.org.